Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here presenting. Thank you so much for the amazing presentations that all the speakers have been already given. And I would like to start by thanking the organizers for having me here presenting my experience as a basic researcher, because I don't have clinical experience, who learn specifically from all of you, from this amazing community, the importance of driving a research agenda that is led by patients, by the power of the patients and their voices. So luckily, I would like to start by sharing a little bit of my personal journey. And I joined Joe Yoslav at the University of Utah 6 years ago, where I started my journey in Kabuki syndrome. And the main goal of my project was to understand the cardiovascular component of Kabuki syndrome type 1. However, I like to say that one of the most important eureka moments or discovery during my journey was the understanding that the only way to achieve a steady path to discovery in rare disease in general, and particularly in Kabuki syndrome, was only going to be possible if we collaborate together, if we listen to patient voices, and if we understand not only from the problem, not only from the perspective of a basic scientist from the bench, but also communicating with families and patients and clinicians. So luckily, I'm not the only one who thought that way. And as Brittany and Annie were also discussing during their presentations, there are a bunch of foundations that are also rare disease foundations that are trying to push together this patient-centric approach. One of the pioneers work on this area is the one that was achieved by Castleman Disease Foundation, particularly the approach of the collaborative network developed by David Fagenbaum. And I would encourage you to take a look at the paper and also read his book. Dr. Fagenbaum himself is a patient of Castleman disease, a researcher and a clinician. So he kind of started this blueprint, this roadmap for all of us to start following this super coherent and cohesive effort in order to achieve discovery that would likely benefit the patients, because that's the center of all of these efforts. So Annie and Brittany already described some of these main steps. I do want to highlight that the center of each of these steps for achieving this collaborative network approach is all of you as basic scientists, clinicians, and patients and families, because nothing can be done if we don't put together all our efforts and coordinate towards the same path of discovery. And this strategy was also adopted by Chen Zuckerberg Initiative in one of the grants that was meant to support specifically patient-led foundations of rare disease in order to elaborate a research agenda that would help every foundation to achieve discovery in a meaningful way for the patients. Of course, I was super excited when I started learning about all of this initiative, and I started collaborating with one of the foundations that was awarded this Rare as One grant. And that's a foundation that is a Cat6A foundation that shares not only the challenges of a rare disease, but also shares with Kabuki syndrome community this characteristic of having a disorder that affects the landscape of the chromatin, an epigenetic disorder. So I was super excited because all what I would learn from this new enterprise, so from this different foundation, I will be able to apply in my research in Kabuki syndrome to better help advance knowledge for our community. So here, this path of discovery that is driven by patient has 8 specific steps, but I only want to highlight the importance of the first 2 steps, and I'm going to describe the initiatives that we've started with the Cat6A Foundation in order to build this community and to prioritize research. So the main focus of this is to gain data, but data from who? Data from patients, from clinicians, and basic scientists. So this whole strategy and this pattern was meant to kind of start developing 3 basic questions that would be asked to every single person, same for families, for scientists, and for clinicians. And these questions are intended to first identify what are the research questions that will impact the most our patients, and then gather the information of what studies do we know that could probably help us to answer these research questions, and who are the top researchers that we're aware of that will help us to tackle these studies. However, this is a standard. We need to shape these three questions to the needs of a specific different foundations, because even though we share the same challenges, we're at different states of maturity in terms of research community or patient registry or natural history studies. So the idea is that us as a community can identify where we are at as a foundation, and then from there establish a tailored plan of how to develop our research agenda. So in our case, the research agenda that we developed for the Cat6A Foundation is represented in this flowchart. And I would like to walk you through some of the steps that I think that are going to be super important for empowering our situation here in the Kabuki syndrome community. So we are right now, this is the results of 1 year of work, and we are hoping to continue this and to pave the way for other foundations that share the similar challenges. And we are in a 3 stages phases right now. The first idea that we had is to start this crowdsourcing project that I'm so glad and excited that we're going to start, and it's going to be held after this session for the Kabuki Syndrome Foundation. And we tackle this crowdsourcing project by asking families and patients, and also researchers and clinicians, those three main questions adapted for the needs of Cat6A Foundation. In the case of the families, we wanted to identify specifically what were the main challenges that the families were facing that it would be super important to tackle to have a greatest effect in the community. And another super important component of this that sometimes is overlooked is that we cross-check this data with a patient registry. For that reason, it's super important that all the patients can add their data and families and enrich the registries and natural history study. We really need the collaboration of the families, not only in identifying the challenges, but also offering the data that will help us to push this research forward. The other main component of this was to identify research synergies and challenges, because as we were today, it was like trying to build a jigsaw, a puzzle with missing pieces or with repeated pieces. So we wanted to unify and synergize all those efforts towards the main questions that families and patients identified. The second stage was then put together all the international community of Cat6A and Cat6B. These two are the genes that are shared in this disorder that is very similar to Kabuki syndrome and overlaps in many aspects. And also to then share all those thoughts that we gather from the research community with the patients in order to align what the patient community wanted, the voices of all our patients together with the synergies of researchers and strengths. So from this effort, we identify 3 main golden points that we are very lucky to be pushing forward right now. The first one is we identified the research priorities. They weren't very clear at the beginning for the foundations, and those were to research in neurodevelopment in general, and particularly in speech development. So we brought speech experts into our community, not necessarily working already with this disorder, but speech experts in general that were the top in the world. Then we identified that one of the main problems that our research community faces is the lack of resources. Dr. Björnsson mentioned even the minimum amount of contribution is super useful for us. We need these kick-ups and startup funds and resources in order to generate data for then applying to bigger grants. So the foundation saw this as a strategic area where, as a community, we could support research, creating and generating these resources. And the third challenge that we identified that we are also tackling is we want those resources to be shared, because we are already facing a very disjointed scientific scenario in many cases. So we want to help to bring all that together and making all those resources shareable through the support of the foundation. And now these are the next steps that we are super excited to develop in the next 2 years, hopefully with the support of this, the grant that we already hold in the foundation and probably additional grants that we are applying for right now. And that is to develop research and research strategies in speech and neurodevelopment. We already presented different research grants that are focusing in this particular area. We are also trying to generate resources. We're currently holding 2 huge initiatives in the foundation. One of them, and then I'm super happy to say that I'm gonna translate the same efforts for the Kabuki syndrome community in my own research project. One of them is to generate a patient-derived iPSC biobank that is going to be shared with all the research community. So instead of each researcher having to spend a huge amount of money to develop these cells, we would generate them, develop them, and then make them available for the whole research community. And the second one, a shareable database, a place, a hub where we can have all the resources that are already available, already accessible for rare disorders that have an epigenetic basis. So we're super excited about those 2 proposals that we are working on right now. And then, of course, this is not something that we start, this collaborative network approach that we start and we stop. We really need to keep pushing. This is a work of every day. It's a way of living, generating this collaborative network approach. And as you can see, for example, from Dr. Björnsson, we already have those outstanding researchers having their own research labs doing Kabuki syndrome. Myself, from my mentor, Dr. Joe Yost, who allowed me to start this research. Now we have two labs that are coming from this effort of Kabuki syndrome research. Dr. Yost and my own lab that I'm going to start in next January at Boston University. So all of this is extremely exciting. But one thing is to see this in paper, and a different thing is to actually be a testimony of how important is patient-driven research and how that changed my own career path. As I mentioned before, and probably some of the researchers here present in this conference and the families might remember an email that I sent a few years ago saying how excited I was that we were working on Kabuki syndrome, developing the zebrafish model, and that we should all work together, collaborate in order to achieve a steady discovery. So I went with the families, I learned from them, and I not only enriched my professional pathway, but also my personal view of how science should be done for rare disease, specifically for Kabuki syndrome. So from all this amazing experience, I mentioned before that the main focus of my research project at Joe's lab was to understand the cardiovascular component of Kabuki syndrome type 1. And for that, we use zebrafish, which is a freshwater fish, as a research organism. And we achieved a wonderful discovery that was kindly referred by Dr. Björnsson about another signaling pathway that was affected for Kabuki syndrome cardiovascular component. But after our interaction with families and knowing how important the neurodevelopment component of this was, Dr. Yost gave me the opportunity to branch from the main project and start assessing the components, the neurodevelopmental component of Kabuki syndrome, not only in zebrafish, but also in human iPSC cells that now we're planning to also take to patient-derived iPSC cells. And we're extremely excited about these results as the main part of this super weird path of my career, where from a cardiovascular researcher and then starting to understand the neurodevelopment of this, I had to gather together heads and leaders on different areas of the field. For example, a neurodevelopmental expert, Richard Dorsky, a person who would work with iPSC cells like Alex Sheklovitov, and then the strong support of 2MD PhD Martin Tristani and John Kerry, who helped me to understand the connection with patients. And everything, of course, thanks to the support of my mentor, Dr. Joe Yost. So this collaborative network approach was already happening at the University of Utah for Kabuki syndrome as I was developing my project. And now we're at a stage where we already have a model for Kabuki syndrome that is a brain organoid. In this case, it's not from patients derived, it's from a very well-established line. And right now, in a collaboration with Dr. Yost, we have the information of every single cell, of every single neuron in these brain organoids in both the epigenomic landscape and also the transcriptome. Dr. Björnsson said this is a cell-specific problem. So now we generated this super huge amount of data sets that will allow us to ask the question of what's happening with the chromatin and with the transcriptome in every single cell of these brain organoids. So we're extremely excited for that. And I'm hoping to keep collaborating not only with my mentor, Joe Yost at the University of Utah, but also with new collaborators in Boston University and with our scientific community to keep developing this collaborative approach. And with that, I would love to thank everybody, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions now in the Q&A session.